Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 2 of A Good Run podcast with Daniel Feldman. This is the season premiere and the 13th episode overall. It's a two-parter that describes the very start of Dan's transition from someone working on political campaigns around the country to running his own campaigns in his own political arena. As always, feel free to stay up with us on Twitter and through our blog, and look forward to the second part of this episode in 2 weeks' time. Thanks so much and enjoy A Good Run podcast with Dan. Hi everybody, welcome back to A Good Run podcast with Daniel Feldman. We're back for what we're calling Season 2 after an extended, springtime break. Dan, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you.
So the last time we left off, I know it was a while ago, we were talking about the end of the Elizabeth Holtzman congressional campaign.
Right.
So obviously pretty big moment for you and for the congressional campaign team.
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, we remember when she first asked me to help out in that campaign, I thought, I'll help her get up to maybe 20% of the vote.
Right.
And the fact that she won was unbelievable.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. Even having been part of a campaign that had gone from kind of a underdog story to a surprise victor, I'm sure it was a kind of interesting psychological moment for you in and of itself.
Yeah, I guess I probably drew false hope from the experience that, goodness gracious, the ridiculously undervalued underdog can actually win. I mean...
And theoretically someone who you thought was wildly more qualified than their opponent, even though they were the underdog.
Well, that's a hard thing to say in the Holtzman-Seller race. I mean, how could you say somebody who's more qualified than Emanuel Seller, who had actually served in Congress for 50 years and had an impressive record? I mean, true, by the time he was in his 80s, he was no longer quite with the times, opposing equal rights for women and so forth. But he had been very instrumental in passing the Civil Rights Act. I mean, this is not an unqualified guy.
Right.
It's just that at this point in time, I thought and still think Liz was the more appropriate candidate.
Right. Did you see that as kind of an indication that perhaps people were ready for kind of new blood?
Yeah, I guess I did. I probably did.
So was that kind of a pervasive thing in the New York political scene, or just kind of piece by piece things were falling?
Hard to say. In Manhattan, at that time, things were clearly changing moving toward a new generation of politicians. The West Side Junior Mafia, the Stuyvesant High School crowd, at the West Side anyway. But in the outer boroughs, I'm not sure everybody reacted. I mean, even I didn't think, oh great, the establishment is going to topple.
Mm-hmm.
It did give me some hope, but I don't think I or the public at large thought, well, this is it. The whole political machine is going to crumble now.
Right. No, I can imagine it's not a particularly fast process.
However, I will say that the anti-war effort, the anti-Vietnam War movement, did rejuvenate the reform clubs, which had been active in the 50s, when the regulars weren't giving Stevenson a lot of help, and when Eleanor Roosevelt and Herbert Lehman and later Eleanor Roosevelt and Lehman were giving a lot of support to that. And then they kind of, after Kennedy got elected, the reform clubs sort of diminished in strength. The Vietnam War revitalized them. Mm-hmm. And so that, I think, that helped Holtzman, and I thought that would help me too, I guess.
Yeah. So this is the early 70s we're talking about. So you're off the congressional campaign. You're about to enter your third year of law school, right? So exactly. What's kind of your mindset? What are you thinking about?
Because so Holtzman wins her primary in
June.
June, yeah. So that's 72. Mm-hmm. So it's now summer of 72. I am planning to run for city council in 73. So summer of 72, we still have the general election, the McGovern campaign. And before that, Al Lowenstein had a rerun against Rooney, which I could talk about, which I got involved in, but that was just a few weeks. Mm-hmm. But the summer of '72, I thought that A, I could help McGovern, who I thought had a chance of winning, and B, lay the groundwork for my council race by working for McGovern in the area in which I would later be running for council.
Got it.
So I had already been working for McGovern somewhat while working for Holtzman. Mostly, I was doing a little work for McGovern with the reform clubs.
Gotcha.
In Rockaway at the time.
So
reform club, I should say, which is one.
What kind of groundwork did you think that you could pull off as part of the McGovern campaign in that district?
Well, for example, I created this organization called People for a Better Queens. Awkward name, but anyway, and I recruited various community leaders in Queens to be on the letterhead. So by establishing relationships with them, making myself known to them, I thought I'd get a chance of getting some support from them during the campaign, and just physically going around and trying to organize for McGovern. I was meeting people.
Yeah, making yourself known.
Making myself known, right?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So give me a little background here. Obviously, you've been involved in quite a few political campaigns up until this point. You're still pretty young.
Oh, yeah. I was
24?
Yeah, about 72. I was 23.
23.
Right? Yeah.
So, I would imagine being a 23-year-old, considering laying the groundwork for your own political campaign, that kind of makes you a bit of a political hotshot early on in your life?
Yes and no. I mean, I think for a guy like Matty Troy, who was the Queens County leader at the time, and I was this big deal, McGovern supporter, and he was willing to meet with me. Mm-hmm. But of course, when I said to him, now that after the primary, when McGovern, was clearly going to win the nomination, I said, I trust you'll be, giving your full support to McGovern now. Oh, yes, of course. Well, he was lying through his teeth. Of course he was lying, but I was too naive to know it. Right. And however prominent, it's a funny word, however maybe prominent I was as a young McGovern supporter, obviously he still regarded me as someone who he could easily mislead and fool and lie to, and he was right.
Right.
So.
Did you kind of feel yourself being a little bit too idealistic about the whole process?
No, I was very naive about it. Yeah.
Okay. So, well, I mean, I guess that's completely understandable given your relative age, but also you have quite a bit of experience for being so young.
Yeah, but I mean, the kind of things most of the kinds of work I had done in the Holtzman campaign and other campaigns I was in were basically recruiting people who were sympathetic, explaining to them what they had to do. I mean, I didn't have experience in being lied to, for example.
Right.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, sure, people tell you they're going to help you and then they don't, but you always factor that in so that you're just talking to large numbers of sort of foot soldiers, and some of them won't show up, but statistically, most of them will.
Yeah. So walk me through a little bit, because you're obviously having to make a little bit of a psychological or mental kind of shift, right? Instead of supporting or representing or kind of coalescing support for somebody else, suddenly you're thinking about coalescing support for yourself.
But in the summer of '72, I wasn't yet asking anybody to support me.
You were just laying the groundwork.
I was just asking them to help me work for McGovern.
Got it.
So
got it.
Right. And also, I think People for Better Queens, as I remember, I was also trying to. Oh goodness! Can you stop this?
Yeah. Okay, now you can go.
Actually, I think my recollection is that People for Better Queens wasn't just designed for the campaign. In fact, even from the name, it was supposed to be a civic organization furthering the interest of the borough of Queens. So,
okay. So were you trying to align with the interests of the borough of Queens?
Yeah. Now, not that the council district was the whole borough. It certainly wasn't.
Right.
But I think for purposes of the McGovern campaign, I wanted, to sort of, to tell you the truth, I don't remember exactly how I meshed the two, but I must have wanted to try to bring people's own community interests in line with the campaign somehow or other. I'm not sure how.
I mean, it only makes sense, right? To gain support from the regular old folks who live in that area, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
That makes sense.
But I think the political organizing was mostly through the Rockaway Independent Democrats, and whatever other political support I could find in other parts of Queens. After all, Rockaway was just that bottom, peninsula, and I was looking toward mainland Queens as well. But probably most of the actual politicking was through the Rockaway Independent Democrats, which was the reform club that my mother, in fact, had created in the early 50s. But nobody remembered her. This is so many years later.
Right. Yeah. So what's the transitionary period? I guess eventually McGovern.
So that's summer of '72. So McGovern loses. I go back to law school in September of '72. Mm-hmm. McGovern, of course, gets clobbered by Nixon in November of '72. But Arthur Crocott, my good friend from college and law school, actually spends the fall semester, although he's enrolled at Harvard Law School too, spends the fall semester sort of trying to keep in touch on my behalf with all the people I had organized through November and even after to keep plugging them into my campaign. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, back at Harvard, I'm raising money from my classmates, and when I say raising money, it was like I had hundreds of contributions, and I raised maybe $3,000, so it was like $10 per person.
Bernie Sanders style.
Right, except with a much smaller catchment group. So I was, announcing that I would be running for council and telling my classmates, that I'm doing that and asking them for their help. And they were very generous at the time, for law students who without money.
Right.
Although some of them had worked in firms that past summer, and they did make decent money. Okay. I did not. I was doing my political stuff.
So Arthur is like doing your bidding on your behalf.
Right. I don't know how he did his law school courses remotely, but somehow or other he did.
You have your cohort donating to your campaign. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What is encouraging these people to believe in you, support you? Can you put your finger on what it was that they were reacting positively to of your own doing?
Well, I think you asked me earlier if there was some sense that there might be a new generation while I don't think that sense was in the minds or hearts of the people of the outer boroughs. Right. It probably was in the minds and hearts of my law school classmates.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Thinking, we're the generation. We're going to change things, and here's a guy who's ready to go. Huh. Also, I suspect that some of them thought that I would have a great political future, and it would be useful to have a connection with some guy with that kind of future.
Right. In your own recollection, did you feel the way that they felt about you? Like, were you as confident as they seemed to be in you, in your own ability as a politician?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I mean, it's clear that people are responding positively to your potential, but, do you feel that?
Yeah, I think at the time I probably did.
Okay.
I didn't realize how my own deficiencies as a politician would ultimately limit my career.
But what kind of deficiencies as a politician could you possibly know of, having not actually been a politician yet?
Right, that's right. And in fact, Liz, I thought I was a better natural politician than Liz. In fact, I think I was actually. But she was very fortunate in her political results. But but I mean, she was not any more of a backslide, easygoing, informal, relaxed person than I was. Mm-hmm. She was even worse at all those things than I was, and she won. Right. So why couldn't I? Now, meanwhile, my mother, who had gone back to college after my brother and I were through high school or most of high school, was telling me about. She kept telling me what a terrible politician I was, particularly compared to this fellow she had met at Brooklyn College, who she said was a real politician, a natural politician, a guy who was, energetic and friendly and relaxed and confident and talked a lot, and a guy named Marty Markowitz, who of course would have ultimately become the borough president of Brooklyn.
Right.
And Marty, of course, had the classic political personality, very outgoing, very outspoken, full of confidence, and so forth. And so my mother, if I listened more carefully, I suppose, should have given me more of a reality testing thing.
So what kind of personal history was your mom reacting to, or unfavorably comparing Marty Markowitz to of yours?
Well, I was, for me to even speak in public was, for me to be able to do that with any degree of competence was the result of a really long, hard slog, because I was excruciatingly shy as a kid, painfully shy. The classic story was when I became an Eagle Scout. I was, for some reason, the tradition was if that happens, you then give a speech to your synagogue. I don't really understand why, but that was the tradition. So, and it was at a regular service. It wasn't something called in order to listen to me, which probably would have produced a small crowd. This was a regular-sized crowd in those days, which is, a couple hundred people. So I wrote a speech, memorized it, got up on stage, forgot my place in the speech, could not go on, desperately tried to think of some way to get off that stage. There's an expression, you want to fall through a hole in the floor. If there had been such a hole, I would have happily fallen through it. I somehow got off the stage, went back and sat next to my mother, and she said, "No one will ever forget that speech. It was so horrible." But I kept at it. I somehow ran for some kind of office in junior high school, and I didn't win, I don't think, but I think I was a class president for my homeroom class, but not the grade president, whatever. Anyway, I kept doing this sort of thing,
right,
making one god-awful speech after another. God-awful because I was terrified,
right,
and when you're terrified, you're terrible.
Yeah.
So, but I would say I probably gave, and then in college, I became president of the Undergraduate Dormitory Council, which was the only student government in college. Oh, and in high school, I had run for class president. Didn't do that badly. The guy I lost to was a really nice guy named Fred Strober, who was good-looking, popular, nice, really decent guy. Mm-hmm. And I didn't lose by too much. It was a pretty close race. So I was getting better, obviously. Yeah. I was still a horrible speech maker, but getting better. And
right.
You do anything enough. I probably gave, I would say, 100 horrible speeches before I ran for the council. By the time I ran, I could give a speech without being horribly embarrassed. I mean, I'm sure they weren't particularly good, but they weren't horrible. Yeah. So this is one deficiency. Right. Another deficiency was that everybody said I was too honest. Now, it's not a question of not stealing money or anything like that. It's a question of not being able to pretend to a feeling I don't have. Mm-hmm. So if I like somebody, it'll be evident that I like him. But if I don't like somebody, that'll be evident too. Diplomacy was not really my strong point, and so that's what people meant when they said you're too honest. Yeah. But I was so devoted to the idea of being elected. Now, let me backtrack. Why was I so anxious to get elected? And I've often tried to figure out why. I'm not sure I know the answer, but the thing that does come to mind when I try to answer that question is goes back to when I was in elementary school, and I went to PS 114 in Queens, which is a really, really good elementary school. We each got a copy of the New York Times every day in like 5th grade, or 4th grade even, but certainly 5th grade, and by 6th grade, we were required to, in those days, 6th grade was in elementary, so you didn't go to junior high school until 7th grade. Mm-hmm. So we were required to write a letter to the editor to the Times, I think every day, or maybe every week, but I think it was every day. Anyway, so I was a Times reader, mm-hmm. and we're talking now about 1959, 1960, thereabouts. And so I was reading about all these terrible things that were being done to black people in the South. And I can remember, I had this very vivid memory of reading the article and feeling this wave of anger kind of, come start my toes and just overwhelm me. I could physically feel it. And I thought at that moment, I want to be able to do something about stuff like that. And that, I think, is the clearest source of my decision to run for office. I think there were probably other things. I would imagine that reading about the Holocaust probably made me think it's important to have some kind of political power to protect yourself against stuff like that. I mean, Kennedy's election inspired me, as it did many people, to go into public service. And, I mean, I already wanted to do it, but with Kennedy's election. And then there had always been a kind of a subtext of politics is important in my house. Very early memory, which I may have mentioned on another occasion, the Army McCarthy hearings. Yep. My mother listening on the radio, and so all these things played a role. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so so I had the desire, even though my personality wasn't right for it. Mm-hmm. But the desire won, in a sense. So
yeah, well, so people are obviously responding to the desire, and that's must be a reinforcing sentiment for you.
Yeah, I guess so.
Do you feel, does that feel that way to you at the time? Or are you just kind of like on a one-track mind, hoping people will follow you on your way?
I think it's the one-track mind thing. Okay. It's more, hope. Yeah. I mean, I even used to say to people, they said, well, you can't be a successful politician. I said, okay, I'll be an unsuccessful politician. and I wasn't kidding.
You meant it.
I meant it. I said, I'm going to do the best I can,
Right. So fall 72.
Right.
Back at Harvard, right. Arthur's kind of your surrogate in Queens.
Right.
What's going on post McGovern election? I guess between that and the end of the year.
As I recall, he was just keeping in touch with the people in the political clubs and trying to remind them of my existence and that I'd be back soon.
What was the time frame in 73 for the election?
In 73. Wait a minute, I'm wrong before. 73, the primary is again in June of 73.
Okay.
So
you're hedging for the middle of the next year to kind of reemerge.
Yes. So the spring semester, which is my last semester of law school, Arthur's back in Cambridge and I'm now back in the district.
Got it.
Also enrolled in some courses at Harvard.
How the two of you managed that, I'm not sure.
I remember Larry Tribe, who was the very great constitutional scholar, often mentioned as somebody who would have been on the Supreme Court but anyway, Tribe was great. He, I told him what I was up to. He said, take my course. You don't have to show up. Write a paper. And I think I may have taken another course with Fuller, who also said the paper is fine. The professors were very
understanding,
cooperative and understanding.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sure that the professors themselves recognize what the students are recognizing. Like, you guys have to be the ones to make a change in American.
Yeah. Also, government. Frankly, there's an old saying that first year of law school they scare you to death, second year they bore you to death, and the second year they work you to death, and third year they bore you to death. The need for the third year is quite questionable, and the professors realize that.
Got it.
So a lot of students are off, skiing in Colorado or whatever. I mean, the fact that I was doing a campaign was
campaigning
at
in
least
Queens.
probably more legitimate.
So what is a campaign for that area of Queens and that time for that office? What does that begin to look like as it kind of ramps up?
The regular organization in Queens and throughout New York City, the regular Democratic organization is a fairly, in those days, fairly well-oiled machine that has hundreds of captains, petition carriers who, like my mother used to be when she worked for the regulars. I mean, there were probably 1,000 voters in Belle Harbor and Neponset who, when my mother would come with the petitions, would sign them. When she told them who the candidate she was supporting was, would say, okay, support that candidate. They had lots of people like that. I didn't. I had the Reform Club, which had no power. Right. So the first question was the petitions. And that's tough because you needed, to run for city council, you needed, I don't know if they've changed this, maybe they may not have. In those days, in any case, you needed, the legal requirement was 1,500 signatures of registered Democrats who lived in the district. But because the other side was good at knocking out names because if they had anything wrong,
Right.
and there were all kinds of technicalities, the rule of thumb was you needed at least 3 times that number to survive the scrutiny.
Yeah.
And so we knew we had to get maybe 5,000 petition signatures, and that was hard.
That seems like a big portion of the registered Democratic population.
No, not in those days, because in the council district itself had about 300,000 people.
Oh, okay. It's a pretty big district.
Yeah, and so I would guess there were probably 70,000 to 80,000 registered Democrats.
Okay. So
but it's a big job getting all those signatures.
But you're aiming for a few percentage points of like 1 or 2% of the registered Democrats to sign your petition.
Well, yeah. Let's say there was 70,000, so if 5,000 is more than 1 or 2%, it's like 7%.
Yeah.
But, and I'm guessing what the number of registered Democrats are. I don't remember anymore. I knew at that time. But that's the first big hurdle. If you don't get the signatures, you're not on the ballot. And the signatures at that point, if the primary was in June, I would think the petition, the due date, the final date for petitions must have been March or maybe early April. And so
you're knocking down doors, right?
Well, but it's not good for the candidate to witness the signature himself, because if you witness it yourself, then when they challenge it, you're hauled into court, and you're in court instead of campaigning. So you need someone else to be the witness.
So who's doing this for you?
Enid Steuben, Karen Goldberg, Karen Heller, my brother. Victor couldn't. At that point, Victor Hertz, one of my college roommates, comes in and takes over becomes the campaign manager. Knew nothing about campaigning or campaigns, but for somebody who knew nothing about it, it was pretty good. Victor couldn't sign petitions because he didn't live in the district, but my brother and all these friends I knew from the neighborhood could do that.
Okay.
So we had. Who else? There were some of my brother's friends. My brother brought a lot of his friends in. I'm trying to remember. Marion Cohen. Anyway, bunches of my brother friends the ones that would go around with me had an advantage, because at least I could say to people, I'm running. Would you? It's not a commitment to vote for me, but just to get my name on the ballot so we can have a real election.
So then you would walk away when they signed
No, I would be there, but the person, Karen or Marion, would be there next to me and would witness the signature.
Got it. Okay.
So the regulars generally did it door to door. They would go around with lists. They knew who all the registered Democrats were, and they because people would open the doors to the captains because they knew them. They could get good signatures from the buildings, I got mostly at shopping centers. And there, the person may think they're a registered Democrat, they may not be. It's harder. The percentage of valid signatures is lower. So, but we just worked very hard, and we got the signatures. And later, when I went to somehow I was at the Board of Elections presenting them, one of Walter was my opponent. One of Walter's people said.